Let's say your grandma has red hair, but your grandpa didn't have red hair. Now, the children, maybe they all have red hair. That means the red hair allele is dominant. It's going to mask the effect of the recessive allele. That's another word I'm going to explain in a bit. So if your grandpa has blonde hair and your grandma has red hair and all the children they get red hair, that means that red hair allele is dominant allele. It's going to mask the effects of the recessive allele, so it takes over. Basically, that's what I'm saying. So dominant allele exert their effects whenever they're present. If there is dominant allele present, doesn't matter what it's for, that's the one that's going to take over. In this case, crossing a yellow seed plant with a green seed plant always yields some yellow seeds. That means yellow seed is dominant. So this is dominant. That means this is a recessive. I'm going to do some Punnett squares for you guys as well. So a recessive allele is one whose effects is masked. So dominant takes over, and then the recessive gets masked if dominant allele is also present. But if you have two recessive alleles, then that's gonna get, that's the one that's gonna be seen. So recessive alleles usually encode for non-functional proteins. So this is what I said earlier. I said if you want to get a cat or a dog, and sometimes they do a lot of inbreeding to get purebred dogs or cats. When they're doing the inbreeding, it's increasing the recessive alleles. So it's impacting the recessive alleles, and it's amplifying the impact. And these recessive alleles are known to be linked to a lot of genetic disorders. So that's why in humans they would say, incest is bad, because if you keep inbreeding, you're gonna have more of these recessive alleles. That means you're gonna have more of the genetic disorders. So recessive allele usually encode for non-functional proteins. And if there is a lot of recessive alleles, it's gonna give you more of genetic disorders. So they did some research on it, and those are the results that they received. Have you guys heard about the mole rat, naked mole rat?
No.
No? Okay, so naked mole rat. So these mole rats, they live in ground, they live in dirt, and it's really hard for them to kind of get around, and they're not able to disperse too much. So there's a lot of inbreeding that happens because they're not, able to go very far. So there's a lot of inbreeding that's happening. But what happened over time, I just told you that if you have a lot of recessive alleles, that's bad. That's going to give you genetic disorders. But what happened with this naked mole rat? Over time, natural selection basically got rid of all the recessive alleles or all the bad recessive alleles. So only good ones stayed around, and then the bad ones are gone. So there is something special about their genome. They don't have a lot of genetic disorders, and they don't want to get cancer. So there's something special going on about their genome. But over time, due to natural selection, all the recessive allele bad ones got rid of. Okay, so two words, dominant and recessive. So I said, so why are some seeds green when a yellow seed plant is crossed with a green seed plant? So you have a green seed plant and yellow seed plant. When they're crossed, there are some green seeds and some yellow seeds. So we're going to look at why this is happening. Another thing I want to mention, sometimes I'm going to use the same example I gave you. So if your grandma has red hair and all the children, they might have red hair, but then their grandchildren, they might have blonde hair. So why some genes skip generations? So genetics can help you answer that question. So why some genes don't show up in the first generation, but they show up in the next generation. But then again, that goes back to independent assortment that we talked about last time. It depends on which sperm is fertilizing which egg, depending on the genetic information inside. But we will be able to calculate that. Okay, so another word you have is homozygous dominant. You already know what dominant means. Dominant means the one that takes over, the one that's going to mask the recessive. Recessive is the one that gets masked. So this is called homozygous dominant. So homozygous means the same and they're both dominant. So you have big G, and that gives you yellow color. Here is heterozygous. Hetero means different. That means you have one big G, other small g. Still gives you yellow because big G is for yellow, and that's the one that's going to take over. Then you have homozygous. That means same again, recessive. Recessive is usually represented by small letters. So small g, small g. If you have both recessive, then it's going to be green color. I want to stop here and I want to see if there are any questions, because you really, really need to understand these three categories in order to do the Punnett square problems.
So in order for us to know what the dominant one is, it would just be the capital one, right? And then also, just by not looking at it, how we were looking at the colors beforehand, the green and the yellow, how would we know which one is more dominant before we actually see it pollinating and then turning it green and yellow? Or would we not know that until it's done?
Yeah, we won't know that, and I'm going to talk about that in a little bit. So if you know, maybe this plant is purebred, but the other one you don't know if it's homozygous dominant or heterozygous, then you have to do two separate Punnett squares and see the chances. Maybe if it's 50-50 and that's what the result you're getting, then you can go back and say, oh, maybe it was this one or if it was this one. So I'm going to talk about that in a little bit. But when I give you the problems, I might say, you have a homozygous dominant individual, and that's mating with the heterozygous individual for a certain trait. And then you do a Punnett square for that.
Okay.
So that's how I will give you some practice for the quiz as well. Correct practice problems.
This same works in a humans too, huh? Right?
I can't hear you, Kunal.
This same method works in humans too.
Can you be a little bit louder?
I think he's asking if the same method works in humans, and is it typical for asexual and sexual reproduction?
Yeah, so we are going to talk about some of the diseases in humans. So yeah, same method works. We are talking about sexual reproduction here. We're not talking about asexual reproduction. We're mixing genes. So two more words I'm going to give you is genotype and phenotype. So genotype are these letters: big G, big G, big G, little g, little g, little g. Those are the genotypes. Phenotype is what's expressed. If you have big G, that's going to give you yellow. That's what's being expressed. Big G, yellow. Little g, green. You don't know these letters, but that's the genotype. And sometimes students think that what's being expressed is, or maybe the color can help you determine the phenotype. So it might be true for some of them, partially. So for example, here we're talking about seed colors. And then let's say maybe we talk about your earlobes. If you have big G, you have detached earlobes. Again, big G, detached earlobes. And if you have little g, you have attached earlobes. Now, you can still see the earlobes, and you can say, oh, if it's attached, it's definitely homozygous or recessive. But then you can't say if it's this one or this one if it's detached. So this is what we're going to talk about. And then one more thing I want to mention for your blood type, you cannot see the phenotype. Phenotype is the proteins that are being expressed, and you can be blood type A, B, or O, but you cannot basically see the color of your blood and say, oh, this is my blood type. So that's not true for all of them. So that's what I'm trying to say. Now I want to stop again, and I want to know if you guys understand homozygous dominant, heterozygous, homozygous recessive, genotype, phenotype, and allele. Anybody confused on any of those terms?
Can you please go back to explain a little bit of what allele is?
Allele?
Yeah.
Allele is a different version of a gene. If you have a gene for hair color, that gene is still for hair color, but then the hair color can be red, it can be black, it can be brown, it can be blonde. So those are different versions of the same gene that's for hair color.